Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Gabra, as you can see on the screen, and I have the privilege of talking to you all a little bit about the audiobook industry, a little bit about craft, a little bit about how you could make your way in if you wanted, and then I'm just going to try to leave some time for some questions, which I think are the best. So, welcome. I'm sure people are joining as they can. Here we are. I haven't done this in just a little bit of time, but back in the Zoomosphere. I might need to get up and check something a couple of times throughout this. And so you'll notice that there's a beautiful outfit on top and yoga pants on the bottom, which is my preferred method of work at this point. What are pants? Or I should say, actually, because you're a British audience, I should say, what are trousers? But what are anything at this point? At least I will actually have trousers on when you see me stand up. So a little bit about me. Again, my name is Gabra, and I have been in the audiobook industry now for about 20 years, which in the audiobook industry at this point is an extraordinary amount of time. And I feel very, very, very privileged by it. I know a handful of other people who have been in it for that length of time or longer. And I know many other people who have been in it for just a bit shorter, and new people who are getting into it all the time. So here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the industry. Then I'm going to talk about how to begin and a little bit about craft. And then I'm going to get your questions. So here we go. A little bit about me. So here I am in my apartment. I'm looking next to me at a booth, which actually, I wonder if that might interest you. Can we do that? Why not? This doesn't have to be so traditional. So here we go. Yeah, here it is. It does say, "Fuck it, let's dance." I hope that's allowed here in this forum. That's what my booth says. And those are the rules I try to abide by. It's like, you only live once, so how can you live it the best? Same with stories. How can you live your story and the stories that you tell the best? So I operate now out of this booth as well as New York studios for the most part. But again, having been in the business for this long, it has taken all kinds of shape and shift. So first of all, a sentence about me. I started out really as an actress in the theater and did a lot of work around the country, a lot of regional theaters, a lot of Shakespeare. That was what I went to grad school for. That was and is my love and my touchstone. Oh, aren't you lucky? We have a visitor. I mean, I feel like if I do this whole thing with a black cat on my lap, I'm going to really look like the witch that I am. Yes, the chicken. I call him the chicken. He usually doesn't like Zoom, but he might visit. That's a blessing for all of us. So I started out as an actress, often in Shakespeare, often in new plays. And then I got my first audiobook job because of someone I met through the theater, the grand, great, extraordinary narrator, Jonathan Davis. American-based, a lot of Star Wars, as well as a huge book of other things. But we met doing a production of Taming of the Shrew. And Jonathan gave me an entree into his company at the time, which was Talking Books. They're no longer around, but it was a nonprofit company doing work for the National Library Service for the Blind. So I'm going to intersperse a bit of my own story with the history of this business. So that is where I got started. And at that time, I was recording a bunch of books during the day and performing Shakespeare at night. And I think my instrument is stronger now, so maybe I would be able to do that still, but I never, ever would. But 20 years ago, it was thrilling to me. Outdoor Shakespeare, record all day and then do outdoor Shakespeare at night. But quickly from this nonprofit company, I wound up meeting a whole bunch of people who went to different companies, and I wound up having a great commercial career in audiobook narration. So for-profit audiobooks with a whole lot of different companies. So I did both of them together for a long time. And then once this booth was built and the world began to shift a little bit, I started to do mostly audio. I also at that point had begun writing. So I say all the time that I do a whole bunch of different things because I'm a writer as well as an actress, as well as an audiobook narrator, and that I encourage everyone to tell stories in as many different disciplines as interests you. Whether or not you're stronger at some or at others, I strongly, strongly believe that we all have such vital and unique stories to tell. And in every medium, we tell those stories. So it's almost like I think we've got an umbrella of what stories we're telling, and that no matter what the portal is, we tell those stories, or we seek to tell those stories over and over again. And that is our purpose, I believe. So I slowly made my way into doing mostly audio, and then separated and branched a little bit again to do now a combination of really all three. I do mostly audio, but I do a whole lot of writing as well. And I produce with a producing partner. So I produce my own work with her. She and I very much are in partnership and are producing short form audio. And I'm still an actress, but I'm a company member of a local theater. And so whenever I can, I do workshops and whatnot. Haven't done a play in a little bit of time, in about 5 years, but I look forward to doing that again too. So that's a little bit about my career. The way the industry has shifted, I'm going to sort of interweave it, is to say that when I started out, they were books on tape. They were actually on tape, and they shifted to books on CD. And then it was a real niche business at the time. And then it shifted because of the advent of the internet. So this shifted this business so greatly because suddenly we were able to have downloadable content, and it made something that at one point was like a real niche or niche business, however you prefer to say it, turned it into something that was not just much more accessible to do and to hear, but much more desirable, I think, for people to download audio. So once that happened, then things really began to shift and move and change. This home studio, or having a home studio, was not on my radar. It took a long time. It took until that shift happened, where suddenly the shift in the industry occurred, where people could record from home, which I think for a lot of people is a privilege. For me, I very much enjoy 50-50. I always prefer going into studios, but there's such joy in being able to have this access at home, especially during the pandemic. I couldn't believe that as an artist, I wound up with a job that was pandemic proof, which I thought, my goodness, it's like I picked up the golden ticket years ago, you know? But that said, now that things are moving and shifting again, I'm quite desperate to do more work back in studios, because I had gotten myself to the point of about being half at home and half in studios. And that for me was the perfect mesh of like convenience and the joy of being with people and collaborating in that way. So now I would say, when I talk about this industry, I would say, and there's a beautiful way I think to introduce like the next couple of things I'll talk about and then your questions. I believe it's now a bit of the Wild West. I think audio has become the Wild West and a new frontier. And what that means to me is that for people like me, we were awfully lucky to get in years ago, because I wound up having quite a career because of all of those early inroads and all of that early knowledge, even just creating a studio years ago, to have some sense of how the technology works and be able to do that myself. But also I think for new people who are wanting to get in or who are interested, I feel like there's a real forge your own pathness about this, and a real, what do you want to create and how, and do that thing. And that, to me, is a beautiful part of this industry. So a couple other little thoughts. I think I'm most interested in your questions. So I will say that I'm going to get to how to begin in a moment. But I just want to talk about craft first for a second, because I think when I started out, I was waiting tables, then I was catering. I used to record audiobooks and cater at the same time, and then do theater. And for me, it was very much my side job. I don't know the language that you all use, but here in the States, we now call it a side hustle. Do you use that term there? I wonder. So it was very much my side job, and I didn't care so much about it. And I don't think that I saw it as telling stories, and I didn't see the purpose of it like I see it now. But I think it's always worthy to talk about, to say that everything that we do, if we've got 2 minutes in a room auditioning, or if we put something on tape, or if we have a short story we're recording, or a long story we're recording, or if it's a play we're doing, that we always have an opportunity in the stories that we tell to change the world, because I believe that's the purpose, right? That storytelling will heal and transform the world. We always have that opportunity. And so I think that I missed something in my first stretch of time in this business, which was that I just saw it as a way to make money. And if you see it that way, that's fine. Everyone to their own, right? That's what it was for me for a little bit. And I didn't actually realize that, in fact, this is a craft. It's a complicated craft. It's a brilliant craft. It's hard sometimes on the body. That's something we can talk about if you're interested, on the physical body. But that all the ways that we tell stories have the capacity to change the world. I really, really believe that. And so my career has shifted very much, both in the content I'm recording, as well as my understanding and knowledge of craft. So for example, when I started out, I did a whole bunch of things when I was working in the nonprofit sector. But then when I started doing commercial books, it was mostly romance to start, which is a great way to start. First of all, I love romance. I write a lot of romance. So I'm like hugely big into romance. But it's a really clear-cut way to begin, right? Because the stories, they're fairly simple. It's the differences of the stories that are complex. The stories are fairly simple and we know where they're going. So it's a really wonderful way. I always coach teaching people romance first. I think it's a great jumping off point. But in my own career, I began that way and slowly moved into more fantasy, which I still do, and some science fiction. And then I would say now, the majority of my work, and I did some YA as well all along the way, but of course I have like mom's voice or a teacher's voice. So it's from a very specific perspective as to when I do YA. But now my career has transitioned to the point where a lot of what I do is nonfiction. And a lot of what I do is memoir, which is my very favorite. I think it's as close as one could get to doing a one-person show. So I feel really lucky that I get to do that, because I feel like I'm literally carrying people's stories in my hands. And I actually think it's probably the way we should all view everything, is that we are holding the writer's stories in our hands, and we must treat them with care and love and respect and nurturing and joy. Because ostensibly, if we're doing this the best, there is a communication between, I always say, it's like, here we are and here the writer is. And in the best form of this, there is some way in which we meld or we channel their work through us, the instrument. So we must honor the writers. I think I honor them, all the writers that I work for, even more now because of this foray into memoir, which is, again, like I said, probably one of my very favorites. Okay, so another couple little things, and then I'm going to ask for your questions. So how to begin? That's probably the biggest question, right? How do we begin? Especially now, because again, like I said, it was different 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So the first thing I would recommend, please write this down. Please go to www.narratorsroadmap.com. An extremely innovative and intuitive narrator has created a site that I send everyone to first, because you can get a whole lot of free resources. And then there are ways also that if you need more resources, either from her personally or from other people, there's ways to then find your way into more resources. But at least you can start there and get an idea of maybe how to begin, where you might want to go in this business, what branch of this might really suit you, how you might find out if you're suited to do this. There's a whole lot of free resources on there that are really beautiful. And I think that the other way is just what you're doing right now, right? We start to read and listen to and access all of the information that we can from anyone that we know of who's in this or associated with this business, which means certainly the narrators, but I also produce. So narrators, producers, teachers, anyone we can, we get as much information as we can. And that is a beautiful way to begin. So that's like a jumping off point. I think I spoke for as long as I meant to speak for, because I really am so interested in who has questions and what your questions are. And if there aren't any questions, I will keep yammering on. But if anyone could please come. Good. Charlie, what's the difference between a narrator and producer? What an excellent question, because sometimes they're the same. So let's see if we separate them into two different jobs. a narrator simply does the craft of narration and simply does the work of the talent, the narrator, the one voicing the story. If you are a producer, and again, if we're separating the two things, then what you're doing is you are responsible for organizing everything behind the content like a producer would on film or any other medium, right? Which is to say that you're responsible for organizing, maybe you're responsible for casting, who's doing what. You're responsible for booking a studio if it's being done in a studio and doing all of that kind of organization. You're responsible for being a liaison between the author and the narrator, etc. Big job. If you are a narrator and producer, which often happens if you've heard of ACX, which is the independent forum where you can be both, and that often happens, it means that, let's say, an author who's known me for years contacts me on that forum and says, hey, Gabber, can we figure this out? Can we do this together? And I say, yes, we can. And I act as both producer and narrator, which means that I'm the talent and I'm doing all of the craft work, but I'm also organizing. Maybe it's in my home studio, maybe it's in a different studio. I'm organizing all of that, and I'm organizing the financials of all of that. I'm also contacting the person who does the back end work for me because I don't do any of the mastering or any of that. Some people do, but it's really complicated, and you really need, that's its own craft, and you need your own knowledge to do that. So I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense of that question? I hope so. I'm going to pause for 1 second and pop up and do something I very much need to do. It will take literally a second, and I'll be right back, and let's see if anyone else has a question. Nope. Okay. Thank you for your patience, everyone. I was like caught between two things today, which I know you know always seems to happen. Oh, good. I'm so glad you asked this. I'd love to know more about craft being hard on the physical body. I'm so glad that you asked. So when we sit down to record an audiobook, and I've got a good exercise for you all to do, but when we sit down to record an audiobook, right, we sort of think in our heads, and I thought this for many years, well, it's just my voice, right? Like it's just this is what I have to be careful of. But actually, when you're doing something that is really a marathon-like sport, it involves the entire body. So in addition to vocal health, how do you keep yourself healthy doing something where you're talking all the time, where you're singing all the time, where you're, whatever the craft is, right? How do you keep your vocal health? But how do you keep your body healthy so that it supports all of that? So here's a couple of exercises and thoughts for you. First of all, this is a craft where sometimes we're standing, but a lot of times we're sitting, which means that we're sitting for hours. And it's really hard to tell a story and to use the full capacity of your vocal instrument if you're sitting all the time. So then what do? Well, why am I in yoga pants right now? It's because I did some yoga this morning before I recorded an article. And it's because I make sure that between, every hour or so, I stand up and stretch. Sometimes I stand in certain studios. Sometimes I stand in my own. But for the most part, I'm doing a lot of sitting. So there's like all of those considerations of my physical body, of how I keep it moving and active and open, even if I'm sitting. And if I'm in a position of kind of, not stiffness, it's not the right word, but if I'm in a position in which I'm moving only slightly because of the noise, in the mic. So that's this part of the body. But then in terms of the voice, then there's all sorts of other considerations, which are, yes, how am I lubricating? Am I drinking water? Always. Am I drinking tea? Sometimes. Am I drinking coffee? I used to drink buckets of it, and it started to make me go crazy. So, but like, it was fine with me. But for some people, it's not. For some people, it's drying out. So it's also what kind of food are we eating to keep our voice open and healthy, and to keep the whole instrument well lubricated, but not overly sticky. Yeah. So you have to then do some tests with yourself to say, does coffee affect me? Does alcohol affect me? Does dairy affect me? How do I make it so that my stomach is not growling too much while I'm working? And all of these things are just a process of playing around and seeing what works for you. And here's a great exercise that I think all of you should do if you are new to this. I always say, set yourself up in like a makeshift studio, which means you're in a comfortable chair and you've got, like, let's say, an iPad in front of you or whatnot, or a stand that has a book on it. And read. as best that you can. You can certainly stop, take drinks, take a breath, move your body around between, but sit in this open, relaxed, but ultimately sort of stationary position and read for 20 minutes and start doing that every day and see how you feel, and take a really good accounting of how does this feel? How does this feel? But also, how does the body feel? Because I find, like, after I work a 6-hour day, my voice is fine, but my body has felt something. My body is really like, wow, like I ran a marathon. So I hope that that's helpful. You said you write as well. Would you narrate your own book? Wonderful, wonderful question. Thank you for asking it. So something I do right now is I have a company with my friend Emily called Love Bites Originals, in which we're doing short form audio. And we're about to produce a new series that I wrote, in which I am voicing, I actually wrote for myself the main character. So I am voicing the main character, and then we have a bunch of people who are voicing the others. And we're all doing this all like synced in our booths at the same time together. But that's a multicast. In the past, I've done similar stuff. Where I like to sort of be the narrative voice, and then have lots of friends do other voices. And I certainly would read my own stuff, but I know so many people in this industry who are so good, and it feels to me like a privilege to have someone else read my stuff. So I would actually prefer that someone else do it, but I would do it, and I do pieces of it myself. Okay, from Amaryllis. It was interesting hearing about the changes in the industry with the internet and different download forms. Do you think it'll change vastly again? Well, now this is the kind of question where, if I had thought about it beforehand, I just would have lined up shots and just chosen which things to like do a shot to, because I think it will change vastly again for a reason that I despise. Anyone want to take a guess in your, like, at home or wherever you are? Think for a moment. Why do I think it's going to change, and why would I need to do a shot right now? Because I think AI is going to profoundly shift everything. I don't know how else it might change. I mean, I think I think there will always be human narrators, because I think ostensibly we want to hear a human voice. We don't want to hear an automated voice, but I do think AI is, I don't think we can turn away from the fact that it will become a profound part of this, and that it will change the industry. Okay, from Catherine Z. How long does it take to narrate an audiobook? Do you do multiple drafts? Again, these are all great questions. So the idea of doing multiple drafts, I would do another shot for that particular part of the question. Again, next time I do this, I'm just going to line them up, which is like a fantastic idea. That, although it's a little early for this here, it's the afternoon, early in the afternoon. So I would say no, I don't do multiple drafts, but I would say, I'm going to go back and answer the other question in a moment. I would say that that some people, I think, and I've done this occasionally, some people will start a book and then maybe go back and like retake a part of it. I have done that with frequency. I have gone back to retake like the first couple of pages, because you sort of know the rhythm of things better a little bit further in, So I'll do that with regularity. Only once recently that I can think of. And it's funny, I can't even remember the book now, but I did something I never do, which is that I went back and recorded like the whole first chapter, which was a lot. And I did it because I loved the book and I loved the author, and I just didn't feel like I was doing it as well as I could. That almost never happens. I couldn't believe I did it, but it was because the author was so genuine and I felt like I was off. Now, how long does it take to narrate an audiobook? Again, really depends on how long the book is, right? However, here's a good rule of thumb, which is generally what we're going for is a 1-to-2 ratio, meaning that if you are looking for 10 finished hours of audio, you will have put in, let's say, around 20 hours of work. Now, then that's a nice average, and that's what you kind of want to get towards. I would say that sometimes, like in a studio, if I'm really open and really free, maybe I'm reading quicker than that. I usually do. But if I'm at home and I'm distracted and there's a million things going on, et cetera, then I'm going to be doing less than that. But that's like kind of a good guide, I think, for how long, for like what the sort of like time of work to time of product ratio is in terms of narration. I think that's it for that one. I'm going to pop up one more time to see if this thing is on, and then I won't for the rest of this conversation. Pardon me. No, not on yet. Okay. This is what you see me doing, popping in and out, is doing a friend a real solid. I'm trying to support a friend while also doing this. So it's all a life hack, right? Okay, from Nick, I want to be an actor, but also interested in audiobook narration. Awesome. It's encouraging to hear you can do both. Is this almost expected of us? Beautiful question. I pause for a moment because I think for most people, we come from a background of acting to get into audiobook narration, but not everyone. And one of my very best friends, the great audiobook narrator and voiceover artist, Allison Johnson, her background is actually in voiceover. She was always a voiceover person, and she also was a singer, but was never an actor on the stage. And she's brilliant at what she does. So my thought would be that it's helpful. It's helpful to have the background of knowing how you tell stories, and that background of figuring out all the ways to tell stories with every part of your body and soul, which is what I think an actor is, before you just tell stories in a different medium, one that, albeit uses the whole body, is here, the audience is here in this mic. So the answer is perhaps it is almost expected, but it's not exclusive to. Waiting for questions, by the way. I should have thought of something fun to do in the in-between as well, like shots for one thing, and then like some kind of weird like air horn. What's an average day like? There is no average day, not for me. I think for some people, well, for people who've got kids, I think their days need to be mapped out more with when like kids go to school. So let's say for my friends who've got kids, I would say that their average days are like drop the kids off, get into the booth while they can, have a little lunch in the middle of the day, finish up before the kids come home, right? That there's like a way that you're organizing it around the school schedule. Then I think for like other friends of mine, and this is the way I used to be, because I used to be really on a theater schedule when I was younger. Yeah. So for me, it was the evenings. I used to record at night and I loved it. So I would have my days free to do whatever. And then I would record at night like I was doing a show. And for me now, it's a bit all over the place. It's a bit like I'm trying to be more disciplined because I like having time at the beginning of the day to do some yoga, to do some correspondence. Maybe I write, maybe I take a walk before I begin recording. Then I like to record. I'm trying to do more work in less days. So I'm trying to get my schedule down from, it's now on pretty much a 4-day work week, which took me a long time to get down to. It used to be a 7-day work week. Then it was a 6-day work week. Then it was a 5-day work week. And now I think I've gotten it down to a 4-day work week, and I'm trying to get it down to a 3-day work week, but that's tricky. So my days go as long as, let's say, I need to fit in the amount per week. And then some work days are actually prep days, which means that I'm looking over a book and I'm figuring out what the voices are and this and that. But for me personally, I don't know that I'm the best example, because I've always lived life like a freelance artist, which means that like, who knows what the days will bring. I mean, I think actually because I have that kind of schedule, my life should be significantly more interesting than it is, but let's just pretend that it is. That's pretty much the way I live. From Zaria, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, what a beautiful name. What are the craziest, most unexpected things that happen during this job that no one would expect? Ooh, what a delicious question. Craziest things that happen during this job. Okay. One thing is kind of pedestrian, but funny. I have a funny story I always tell, but it's a little pedestrian, which is that things make noise that you wouldn't expect. So it used to be, for a long time, people would know that I had recorded even if they didn't recognize my voice, because they would hear the tinkle of my earrings, because I used to forget to take them off. So there was always a little like ding in the background. Now I know to take them off, but also materials make different sounds, right? So there was one time that I was recording in a studio and I was wearing trousers that just were crinkly. And I remember that I recorded for a bit, but every time I shifted at all, it was like a crinkly noise. And so at some point my producer, who's a woman who I'm dear friends with still, she was like, I'm so sorry to ask you this, but I think you're going to have to take them off. And so I had to record trouserless. And I always say, like, the trouserless read is a great read, but we always have to do things like that to account for noise. Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing is I'm hoping to do a podcast with a friend about this, but the other thing is, like, you wouldn't realize how noise affects things. So there's this funny dance, and it happens in professional studios, it happens in home professional studios, it happens everywhere, but there's a very delicate dance between, like, okay, airplanes, sure. Okay, yeah, people walking outside, sure. But then there's that moment where you're like, what could that noise possibly be? Like, I have this amazing woman living above me. She's also an artist, and I adore her. And at some point I'm going to say to her, what rolls across the ceiling at all times? What could it be? Like, is it just a rolling chair? It doesn't feel like it, though. Are you, like, playing a sport in your apartment, which sounds wonderful, but sometimes I have to stop recording. So it's stuff like that. It's a little weird and wild. All right, who else? Who else has a question? Or maybe that's it. Do we end on the trouserless read? We end on the trouserless read.
Yeah, that was the last question that came through. So.
Wonderful. Well, in that case, I'm not sure if Madeline, if you're ending this, or if I'm ending it, but I will just say thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you for your wonderful questions. I've had a lovely time talking with you all in this forum, and I hope you've learned a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been really informative. So yeah, thank you again.
It's my pleasure.